Okay, so thank you everyone. Let's continue from where we left last week. Just to for anyone who has joined new and those who have forgotten what I spoke last year, I'll give a quick refresher. So this is about India-China 1962 war. These are my references where I've quoted. So quickly, we started with discussing about the region. The boundary is shared between multiple states across the northern and eastern sector of India. So it starts. China and India shares its boundary over Jammu and Kashmir state, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh. Arunachal Pradesh was known earlier as NEFA during that time, NEFA, that stands for Northeast Frontier Agency. Just hold on a minute. Yeah, so so that was a British division, and then later on it got its state status of Arunachal Pradesh. And then the boundary shared by Tibet. The whole border is divided into three sectors. Top one is the western sector. Due to the geographical region, though it is the northern part of India, we often call it as western sector, which has a line of actual control, and it divides Aksai Chin. Then there is a middle sector. This is relatively peaceful. There's no contradiction here. Both India and China agrees to this boundary. And then there is eastern sector, where the eastern sector has McMahon line. And we discuss about the controversies behind the McMahon line, why China does not acknowledge this McMahon line, because it was in 1914, it was agreed between British India and Tibet, and China does not recognize that Tibet, so China does not recognize this entire line. But on the contrary, Pandit Nehru, as per Pandit Nehru, McMahon line was a sacrosanct, and he believed that China agrees to that. Moving on further, we talked about the budding geographies. India and China both were relatively new country. India got its independence in 1947, and China also got a communist regime, People Republic of China. Overtook the country after fighting a civil war, and Mao Zedong, who was the chairman and of the China at that time, who was the first chairman, and Chow En-lai, who was the premier of China. Also, you can term it as prime minister. So yeah, we touched upon that. And then we talked about how India kept on ignoring and testifying China. India acknowledged Chinese communist regime, and India kept on ignoring the signals of aggressive China's expansionist policies. Because in 1950 China acquired Tibet. India didn't say anything. In 1954, India continued to term it as India continued to assume that we have good relationship with China, and there are no border issues. We signed a peaceful agreement, which was applauded by the international community, Panchsheel Agreement, but it has nothing. There was no benefit in this from Indian perspective, if you look at it from the border region. Right. So then we ignored the whole Xinjiang to Tibet road construction by China in 1957, as it passed through our Aksai Chin region. Though we did we did write a letter to Chinese Premier Chow En-lai, and we did not got a positive response from them. We talked about Johnson Line and McDonald Line. I won't go in detail into that, but yeah, Johnson Line is what India thought to be. Johnson Line said that Aksai Chin belongs to India, and McDonald Line said that Aksai Chin belonged to China. Again, it was during the British time that these lines were laid out. Then finally, we talked about this whole Xinjiang Tibet road. As I told you, India was caught by surprise, and it didn't open the eye. And Pandit Nehru, even at that time, was of the opinion that it is a barren land. To which our noted parliamentarian Mahavir Tyagi responded in a very funny way by saying we cannot chop off our chop off our land just because it is barren. So you look at my head, it is also barren. And then uh, Tibet uprising happened in 1959, and that's where we left. So India provided asylum to Dalai Lama, who was the head of Tibet, spiritual and political head of Tibet, and along with Dalai Lama, hundreds and thousands of Tibetans came, and we provided us, status home to them on purely humanitarian grounds. So at that time, India-China relationships were distorted, and there were a lot of skirmishes happening at the border, resulting to the deaths of several Indian border guards. It went all the way up to 1962. During that time, diplomatic negotiations were going on between India and China, and the relationship was taking a downturn already. In 1960, China's Premier Zhou Enlai visited New Delhi, but we had very rigorous meetings, but no conclusion was reached, as both leaders, both Pandit Nehru and Zhou Enlai, were talking about status quo, but status quo was different for both of them. So for Pandit Nehru, status quo was Aksai Chin and NEFA. Both belongs to India, and for Zhou Enlai, he was okay to go back and leave NEFA region to India, though he considered McMahon Line as illegitimate. But Aksai Chin, he was not willing to leave because of this strategic route to connectivity to Tibet. Okay, now fast forward 2 years. On October 20th, 1962, China declared an all-out war and attacked India on both eastern and western sector. Three regiments of Chinese troops. Can please everybody go on mute? Three regiments of Chinese troops mounted a blistering attack on Indian Army's 7th Brigade along the southern bank of Namkachu River. So you can see here, we were attacked on both fronts. So, there were not enough personnels deployed. Even those who were there were not fully equipped to fight on those altitudes and extreme cold. Soon the Chinese army captured Tawang region. It was a very strategic location in the Nefa region, the Tawang area. And in just 3 days, Chinese were in full control of this whole Nefa region. The western sector, let me take a highlighter. Yeah, the western sector was already in a bad shape, as it was already occupied by the Chinese army. They went further ahead and occupied places like Chipchap Valley, Galwan Valley, and famous Pangong Lake that you all know is a crucial boundary between India and China, and we are still fighting for that. Well, we were run over by Chinese overwhelming forces like sitting ducks. With such massive defeat, it is natural to think, how could this happen to us? How can Indian army be caught completely off guard? Well, there are multiple reasons for the same, which I have broadly categorized into 4 points. First and foremost, there was a complete failure of civil intelligence that resulted in our abysmal performance. Well, at that time, we used to consider Pakistan as our only enemy. We never took China as a threat. B.N. Malik, there was a person named B.N. Malik who was the director of Intelligence Bureau. He was in complete delusion about China. By the way, at that time, RAW was not formed yet. RAW is a secret agency, if you know, Indian secret agency. That came into existence in 1968 when Indira Gandhi decided to have a full-fledged secret security service instead of a clerical administration like Intelligence Bureau, right? So Mr. Malik seemed ignorant of Chinese strength, mobility, tactics, and was able to convince Pandit Nehru. And was able to convince Pandit Nehru that China is not a threat. There is no problem with a border with China, and our defense minister V.K. Krishna Menon at that time also believed the same, that China, we are all good with China, there's everything fine. So this view was in complete contrast with military intelligence. It is a recorded fact that a decorated officer like Lieutenant General SPP Thorat wrote to Indian government in 1959, imagine, a full 2 years before the war, and warned about China's threat to India and warned to better prepare Indian army for that war. However, Lieutenant General Thorat's findings were outright rejected by Defense Minister Menon, citing him as an alarmist and a warmonger. The second thing I think is that our government's approach to China was completely based out of fantasy. Pandit Nehru, as I said, was in assumption that China will not stand up against India, as India is backed by both United States and Soviet Union. However, with each passing day, Pandit Nehru was losing on his political mileage as tensions with China were only increasing. So, in order they have to show some action on the border. So, in order to show a resolute government action against China, Indian Army, without any adequate preparation, was asked to send Indian troops and border patrols further into the disputed areas. So they went beyond the traditional boundary inside China. So this policy was commonly known as forward policy. So it's a very famous policy, the forward policy. This alarmed and spooked China, and China quotes this as one of the main reasons for the war. Well, at that time, when forward policy decisions were made, Indian Army was in a very poor state, especially in their readiness for such high altitude warfare. Imagine 16,000 feet high, and severe cold, right? Their firepower, supply system, training, and readiness for mountain operation, everything was lacking. Indian Army was significantly understaffed and was completely outnumbered by Chinese forces by a huge ratio. To put troops in such circumstances against an enemy superior in every detail of military strength was completely absurd. I cannot even imagine to leave them in an early winter of heavy snow and freezing temperature, condemning them to die a slow death due to exposure, illness, and starvation was absurd. But this is what India did. I mean, they launched their forward policy. It was completely a militarily, it was a nonsensical policy, and experienced officer like General Thimaiya, SPP Thorat, they all opposed this, but Pandit Nehru and Krishna Menon and Kaul, who was believed in it, and it was conceived, or they were convinced that Indian Army would be almost invincible against the Chinese. By the way, those who attended my first session on India and Pakistan War of 1947-48 must be familiar with General Thimaiya's name. I told specifically about him, where he converted the mule track into the road and took tanks up to the Zozila Pass and took enemy by surprise and captured Zozila Pass. So these were the guys who had first-hand experience on the border and the war, right? Another factor was another factor for such colossal damage was due to politics in army. Lieutenant General Brij Mohan Kaul, as you can see on the image, this is Mr. Kaul, was made Chief of General Staff against recommendation of Chief of Army Staff, the then Chief of Army Staff, General Thimaiya. Now, General Thimaiya and other senior officers were against Kaul because there was no personal reason, but because Kaul came from an Army Service Corps officer. So Service Corps is a sector where they don't go for war. He had no previous war experience. And despite having no field experience, he was handpicked by Pandit Nehru and the then Defense Minister, Mr. V.K. Krishna Menon, due to some personal preferences, superseding some other deserving candidates both in seniority and experience. Some accounts suggest that Kaul was also in a way related to Pandit Nehru as well. I cannot prove that, but there are sightings which says that they both were in relation. Well, in 1962, Mr. Kaul was made General Officer commanding entire Northeast and entire Nepal region, and that came under his command. And he was supposed to lead a fighting unit. Imagine a senior with no war experience. He was supposed to lead a fighting unit to keep a check on Chinese. It was a complete blunder. And his decisions both before and throughout the war made a significant dent on Indian Army's preparation, response. When the war break out, when the actual war break out, I mean, on the very first day, he got a heart attack and was sent to New Delhi for treatment. Imagine armies fighting on the border, and the officer in command is in New Delhi, but he was still acting as a GOC, General Officer in Command of NEFA, from Delhi without being actually present on the field. To give you a perspective of how much underprepared we were, when the war broke out, Chinese attacked with 3 regiments in just Tawang. Imagine 3 regiments in just Tawang, and each Chinese regiment has a strength of approximately 1,000 to 1,500 soldiers. And this was just Tawang. Forget about other sectors and areas. In contrast, Indian Army's 7th Brigade, which was supposed to defend Tawang and entire McMahon line, had just 2 battalions with approximately 400 men each at the time of the attack. You can do the math. How much, how we fought that battle, how an Indian army could have fought that battle and won that battle. If you're interested in more insightful details into how things were carried out, and I would recommend two books. One is 1962, The War That Wasn't, written by Shiv Kunal Verma, and the other one is Himalayan Blunder. It is written by Brigadier Dalvi, who was very much present at the front line and got captured by Chinese as prisoner of 1962 war. So feel free to go through these books. These are really insightful books. Well, moving on, we already discussed that Indian Army was severely under-equipped both due to army leadership and government inaction, and we know that the Indian government treated only Pakistan as their enemy. So the army and Indian Army defense budget was abysmally low. Army at that time, army had about 350,000 personnel, soldier strength. Imagine, which increased to 800 and around 800,000 after the 1962 war defeat, right? So the entire Indian army had only 8 divisions, which were split into 7 infantry and 1 armor. 8 divisions. I'll give you what it means today to give you a perspective how it looks today. So as per the available information on the internet, I'm just citing public information because all these are secret things. Today, Indian Army has 7 commands. Under those 7 commands, there are 17 corps, and under those 17 corps, there are 40 divisions. So it was only 8 divisions in the entire army back in those days versus 40 divisions as per today. So you can imagine how much understaffed we were in general. So and obviously we were not prepared for the war. We did not understand the topography, the weather of that area. There were no mobility across the mountains. There were no supplies. We were lacking virtually in every area, be it arms and ammunition, engineering equipment to operate at such high altitude, right? Tentage, ration for soldiers. Many soldiers were remained hungry for many days, and even appropriate clothing was not present, exposing them to extreme cold weather. So it was a complete mess. Now, with all these things, I try to give you a perspective of the war and how we were dealing with that war, that sudden war. Coming back to the war zone, just after 3 days of intense fighting, so China attacked on October 20th, and after 3 days of intense fighting, the war suddenly came to an abrupt end on October 24th. There was no fighting for next 3 weeks. So during this time, on October 24th, Chow En-lai offered a peace proposal to Nehru, offering 4 points. Now, what were the 4 points? It was the same 4 points that he has been repeating to Nehru, like a negotiated settlement of the boundary. Both sides will withdraw 20 kilometers behind from the present line of actual control, and China will withdraw from Nefa, right? And both countries will not cross line of actual control in Aksai Chin. So this was the same line that he has been repeatedly offering since 1959, which was simply the Indian claimed McMahon line in Nefa and Chinese claimed McDonald line in the Aksai Chin region, right? So Pandit Nehru was politically wounded by his policies by now towards China in all these years, and with this war going on, his political ratings took a further down hit, right? And he was completely feeling, he was a very emotional person also. So I mean, he tried to do good. There was no bad intentions, but so he was feeling, he thought China will not treat India like that, but so that's why he was feeling betrayed by China. So on November 8th, the Indian Parliament proclaimed state of national emergency and adopted a resolution to drive out the aggressors from the sacred soil of India. Right. So on November 14th, after much deliberations, Pandit Nehru wrote another letter to Chow, again rejecting Chow's October 24th proposal and refuting any Chinese border claims. So as you can imagine, just after that letter on November 14th itself, the war began, the fighting began, and in the both western and eastern sector, and the same story repeated. We were overwhelmed by Chinese attack, and China was in full control of entire Nefa in the east and Aksai Chin in the north. Well, in Indian Army has no dearth of bravehearts and no shortage of sagas of valor, right? So in 1962, war was no different. Despite of all the odds, we have many such tales and it will be practically impossible for me to cover them all here. But I have picked 3 incredible stories of bravery and commitment that lesser mortals like us, or like me, I should say, can only take inspirations from. So the 13th Kamau Regiment, the story goes like that. The 13th Kamau Regiment, Charlie Company was tasked to defend the Rejangla Valley. That this Rejangla Valley had a strategic airstrip, and Major Shaitan Singh was the leader of that Charlie Company. Yes, his name was Shaitan. Yeah, and he did really cause much trouble to China. So on November 18th, his post was attacked by heavy Chinese forces. He and his men fought back and stood firm, even though they were doomed from the start. There was no artillery support at 16,000 feet, and on top of that, there were barrage of Chinese soldiers with modern guns, and the temperatures were freezing. So, officer there fought the battle of his life, and though he was seriously wounded, bleeding, he continued to fight to raise the morale of his entire unit. When he finally died, Major Shaitan Singh remained in the battle position, and his hand was on the trigger of his weapon. So though Rejangla was overrun eventually, obviously because China had so much of man force. But an estimated account says that China suffered 500 casualties in that battle, that particular battle, and 114 out of 123 soldiers, Indian soldiers, got martyred that day. So there were only 123 soldiers present to face the entire army of China at that post, and 114 of them died that day. Major Shaitan Singh got posthumous Paramveer Chakra award, which is the India's highest gallantry award. So this is, as you can see, is Rejangla War Memorial. It still stands tall today to commemorate the supreme sacrifice of that company, brave hearts. So it was a critical checkpoint. So after this battle, Chinese couldn't, though they acquired the point, but they were the attack was blunted. They couldn't proceed and advance to Leh. The another one is Subedar Joginder Singh. He was a commander of a platoon of a Sikh regiment. Now, just to give you a number, platoon has a strength of about 32 soldiers. So just note down the number. His platoon was holding a defensive position. It was a defensive position at Tongla Pen in Nefa, somewhere here, as you can see in the map. At around 530 hours in the morning on 23rd of October, Chinese opened a very heavy attack with the intention of breaking through this pass and occupying Tawang region. And they attacked in a ridge of 3 waves, and each wave was about 200 Chinese soldiers strong. So Subedar Joginder Singh and his men mowed down the first 2 waves, but they lost half of his men. Subedar Joginder Singh was himself wounded in the thigh, but he refused to evacuate. And under his inspiring leadership, the entire platoon stubbornly stood there and fought. But when the position was attacked third time, he himself manned a light machine gun and shot a number of Chinese soldiers. But China was so huge in the numbers, Chinese army were so huge in the numbers. When finally he took bayonet, he and the remaining soldiers took the bayonet. Bayonet is that knife, if you have seen, in that fits on top of of a gun, right, on a rifle. So he took the bayonet and started fighting hand-to-hand combat, and he kept on fighting till his last breath. And Joginder Singh, Subedar Joginder Singh also was honored with the Paramveer Chakra posthumously. The last one is the story of these 3 bravehearts is the most interesting one, as there are many folklore surrounding this rifleman Jaswant Singh Rawat. I will tell you the official version, but leave it up to you to explore the folklore. It's very interesting story if you try searching the Google. So Rifleman Jaswant Singh was serving the 4th Battalion of Garhwal Rifles, and on 17th of November, the battalion was subjected to repeated Chinese assault. Now, there was a medium machine gun, or MMG, if you have heard. It was located nearby, which was causing much destruction to Indian post. Right. So Jaswant Singh, together with Lance Nayak Trilok Singh Negi and Rifleman Gopal Singh Gosain, did a daredevil and unbelievable act. They went ahead in the line of fire near to that Chinese MMG, and when they were near enough, around 10-12 meters, they threw a hand grenade at the bunker, killing a number of Chinese. They took the MMG, took it back to the post. In that, Jaswant Singh took a hit. Jaswant Singh and Trilok were fatally hit, but Gopal was able to get that MMG back to the Indian post. This insane act of valor turned the course of the battle, and Chinese had to retreat, leaving some 300 Chinese men behind. Jaswant Singh got a Mahavir Chakra and the other two guys got a Veer Chakra. Now this is not all. The interesting part still remains. Now the post where Jaswant Singh fought this battle was still now known as you can see in the image, is known as Jaswantgarh. This person was also known as Baba Jaswant Singh Rawat. His personal belongings are still kept safe even today at Jaswantgarh, and five soldiers are specifically assigned to take care of Jaswant Singh's room. They give him the breakfast at 4:30 a.m. Bed tea at 4:30 a.m., breakfast at 9 a.m., and dinner at 7 p.m. You will be amazed to know that he still gets unofficial promotion at regular intervals, and some accounts say that he has been promoted to the rank of lieutenant general, and his salary is also credited every month, and he gets official leaves as well. It's a surprising story.
And just to add to that, he also has a railway reservation ticket to go on
Yeah.
holidays also.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, anyways, coming to the end, so how the war finally ended. So well, dramatically on November 20th, Chow En-lai publicly announced ceasefire unilaterally. Now, the terms of ceasefire were similar to what Chow En-lai has been telling Pandit Nehru since past 3 years, which is Chinese troops will go back to 20 kilometers behind McMahon Line, and whole of the Aksai Chin will belong to China. Uh, so they do agree to give NEFA back to India. But the question comes, why did China suddenly did that? What it did? As per the official Chinese statements, Chinese stopped the war because China has achieved its two objectives when it started the war, which were to teach India a lesson of giving Tibet a refuge, and then this whole forward policy. So they wanted to teach India a lesson, and they wanted obviously to retain the region of Aksai Chin because of its strategic importance to China. So, but there are other theories which points to other reasons of China withdrawal. First of all, the timing of the launch of the attack. So timing, it was too much of a coincidence that it matches exactly with the time of Cuban Missile Crisis that was going on between United States of America and Soviet Union. Now, this was the scariest time and event of the Cold War, when both the giants were pitted against each other and the world was on the brink of the nuclear holocaust. So geographically, if you look on the map, Cuba is just 90 miles away from the shores of United States. And in 1960, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had pledged to defend Cuba and started deploying medium and intermediate range ballistic missiles. By the way, Nikita is a male, not a female, so don't go by Indian name standards. So yeah, so when US observed this deployment, obviously it naturally objected to the missiles, and that because they could easily reach to the territory of United States, so it immediately asked Soviet Union to back off. Now this was a tense standoff between both countries, and intense negotiations was happening. This last, and they were both the countries were ready to launch their nuclear warheads. So this was also called a 13-day standoff, which started around mid-October and ended on October 28th, when Russia agreed to back off its missiles. So see the timeline. This is a thriller topic in itself, and we can discuss in detail later. So see the timeline. Chinese had timed this attack thinking that Russia and America will be too preoccupied to step into India-China crisis, but this whole their whole calculation turned out to be wrong, as by November, US and British military aid was offered to India, and also US aircraft carrier group has been moved strategically in the Bay of Bengal, but it was towards fag end of November. So as per this theory, China's withdrawal was prompted more because of US involvement, as China didn't wanted US to up its stake in the conflict from India's side. There is another theory that suggests that China waged this war against India as they were facing domestic discontent associated with the disastrous failure of their Great Leap Forward plan. Now, the Great Leap Forward was the second 5-year plan of People Republic of China. It was a social and economic campaign led by Chinese Communist Party from 58 to 1962, which completely got backfired massively and caused tens of millions of deaths in China. And due to all this, Mao Zedong lost some control over domestic policy. The popularity rating were going down, and a quick victory against India increased his prestige and power within the Chinese Communist Party. So those are the two theories that goes along the Chinese official version. Coming on to the last section, let's quickly review the mistakes and lessons learned. The defeat in this war broke Pandit Nehru, who until now enjoyed the status of a towering statesman. Post this war, his health severely deteriorated and he died just 2 years after war in 1964. It is often said that he could never reconcile with the betrayal of China and the events that led to the war of 1962. And he completely got isolated in the blame. As you can see, we all, I mean, since then, everyone is blaming him, be it the appointment of Krishna Menon as a defense minister, handing over NEFA command to Lieutenant General Kaul, believing blindly on Intelligence Bureau Chief B.N. Malik, and assuming that China will not respond to India's forward policy passively retreat. So he was the central figure of that whole war. He, on his account, did made a lot of assumptions and failed at almost every step to anticipate China's sinister plans. Indian government ignored thunderous warnings and advice of senior and experienced military officers, and it turned out to be disastrous, right? So we were very poorly prepared for that war, and thankfully we came to know that Pakistan is not the only enemy now after that war. Logistical readiness, we have seen, it's vital for any military operation, and India was poorly prepared logistically, be it supplies, weather, soldier equipments, anything and everything. So India was neither trained or prepared for such high altitude warfare. So, and moreover, on icing on the cake, Pandit Nehru decided to not use Indian Air Force. So at that time, India had a decent Air Force. Some accounts suggest that Indian Air Force was even better than China. So, but Pandit Nehru decided to not use Indian Air Force and bomb Chinese position, which many historians today still believe that may have been a reason. We don't know. May have been a reason to lose that war. Then general leadership and command is always very important. If we can see the contrast in Aksai Chin, even though we lost Aksai Chin, but the forces were well organized and led. But in NEFA, due to inexperience of Lieutenant General Kaul, there was often confusion, command changes resulted in disorganization and poor combat readiness. The troop movements were totally inappropriate in many of the accounts. They were sent to positions which have already been overrun. So General Kaul often ignored and disputed the advice of his junior generals. He was often indecisive, changing orders minutes after they have been issued. So, and due to all this, immediately after the ceasefire, General Kaul was relieved, and a few days later, he himself resigned from the army. And then it is vital to build strong international relations where we lack. So India, despite being considered as one of the leaders of the non-aligned movement at that time, none of the countries of that group came to India's assistance or to intervene. Even US and UK pitched in the very last moment after Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru literally pleaded and wrote to John F. Kennedy, the then President of the United States, multiple times in November. So there is a recorded letter exchange of John F. Kennedy and Nehru during the November timeline. So all is not lost, though we lost the war, but India also benefited as well in few areas. We became united as a country like never before. We did get NEFA back, even though it was occupied by Chinese at the time, by the time war ended. So Arunachal Pradesh is still a state of India. India recognized the serious. This was the best thing. So India recognized the serious weakness in our army and doubled its military power in next couple of years. It worked hard on its military training to sort out its logistical problems, and emerged as the world's finest armed forces in next couple of years. So now we also started having strategic relationship with superpowers, and we started accepting military aid and deals. We started doing deals from various countries and sectors. So it was an incredibly short war. If you see, 3 days in October and then couple of days in the fag end of the November with a 3 weeks lull. It lasted over 30 days officially. But it still hurts today the way we lost. We learned our lessons well, and we're soon about to give it back to China in 1967. Well, don't worry, I'm not going to cover it today as that is a topic for another session. Before I end this session, I'm going to leave you with this Google search term, Henderson Brooks report. This is the most well-kept secret that Indian government has kept classified till date. Try doing your research with it and reach out to me with your observations, and also the name of the journalist whose startling claims made this report more popular, sensational, or I should say scandalous in the last 6-7 years. So I will leave you with that search term. Do your research, and with that I end my session. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind. Thank you very much, Abhinavji. Let's have a big Om for Abhinav. Abhinavji. Very good. That's actually very good. Thank you, Abhinavji. Now,